It is time for Around the 412 with Smitty and Tyler.
Welcome back to another episode of Around the 412. I am Tyler. With me, as always, is my co-host Smitty. Go follow us on all of our social medias at Around the 412. Also, if you're not watching there already, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. Also, follow us wherever you listen to the podcast, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, or wherever. We're there. And check out whether you're listening to the show or watching the show. The description of the show, we have all the links to our great sponsors, some clothing companies, some electrical work, some shorts as well. If you need anything, we've got you covered. But this is the Penguins show, and pleasant surprise, at least for the most part. Penguins are 2-1 since we last recorded, and gotta say, I didn't see it unfolding the way that it did in the last week, namely the goaltending. That is something that we have talked about last week at length, and we were saying how it's going to be Blomqvist net. Needless to say, on Friday night against, I believe it was the Sabres on Friday night, they start Nedeljkovic, and not only, of course, the day after the game actually happens, we had our podcast released to schedule. But of course, in that game, something historical happens, and we can't even talk about it on our most recent Penguins show, so we have to mention it now. Alex Nedeljkovic not only had a great game as far as saves go and his play in net, but then also adds an assist and adds a goalie goal, becoming the first goaltender in NHL history to record an assist and a goal in the same game. And he's the first goaltender in, I guess, North American hockey history to score a goal at the ECHL level, the AHL level, and the NHL level. Incredible stuff from Ned.
It's pretty big.
That is awesome. We didn't get to talk about it last week because, like we said, we pre-recorded before that Sabres game, assuming that, well, for one, I didn't even know that Ned was going to be starting. I don't think either of us did. And then two, we were not expecting a goalie goal, let alone NHL history from Nedeljkovic. So hats off to him. Incredible effort in that end, and being able to do it at multiple levels too. NHL all the way down to the ECHL. That is absolutely awesome. But I mentioned something that we did not see. We talked at length about how Joel Blomqvist, it's his time. Tristan Jarry gets put on waivers, and Nedeljkovic, he's also one that maybe could be moved on from, and he's going to take that backup role, and it's going to be Joel's neck. In actuality, we see Nedeljkovic play against the Sabres on Friday, have that incredible game. Yoel plays against the Capitals, which I will say, Penguins did not look great all night in front of Yoel. But I'm sure he would like to have a few back. Plus, they're playing the Capitals, who, surprisingly to all of us watching this season, are leading the Metropolitan Division. Pretty crazy to think about that. And then Ned gets the start again the other night against Los Angeles and looks good. And they get the win. They win 5-1. And I just got to say, I did not see this after we last recorded and we found out the news and we talked about all the goaltenders. I did not see Ned making 2 out of the 3 starts, and not only making the starts, looking the way that he did in those games.
So it didn't surprise me how Friday and Saturday played out from the goaltending perspective. If anything, the start against the Kings, I thought maybe would be Joel Blomqvist, because it was a back-to-back nights against the Sabres and Capitals. So if you wanted to put faith in the fact that Sullivan was going to give Yoel a lot of the starts going down the stretch, right out of the bat, he faced a tougher level of competition in the Capitals than the Sabres. So I think that's a good sign. But to turn back to Ned against the Kings, I thought was interesting. So I don't even know how to view what they're going to do going forward. They both played pretty well. I know they lost that game 4-1 to the Capitals. I thought Blomqvist was not the reason that they lost that game. I thought he played pretty well. And then Ned obviously has given up, 3 goals in those 2 games, and he's played very well in those 2 games. Not everybody probably watched that Kings one. What was it, a 10:30 puck drop, 10:30 puck drop during the week?
And it didn't even start then. It started 10:45.
Yeah, so I'm assuming a lot of people on the East Coast weren't tuning into that one, but I went to bed when it was 4-1, so I didn't even watch the entirety of it. but he was very good, and I'm curious to see what the path is going forward. Like, I don't know. Are you reading into these last 3 games in the way? Because again, Friday and Saturday were exactly what I expected. I thought maybe he would start against the Kings. By the time people are watching, listening to this, they're going to have played the Ducks, another late one. So, do you think that's going to be Nedeljkovic or Yoel, or what are you expecting, if anything, different now that we've seen 3 games?
Well, here's what I'll say about last week's games too, and I hear what you're saying about playing the tougher competition and that being a good nod for him. But Sullivan historically has always played his number one goalie first, no matter who the second or first game is going to be. So Ned being that goalie on Friday night, even though it is against the lesser competition, to me that is kind of like more of a tell just because of the historical tendencies of what Sullivan likes to do with his goaltenders of who his number one goalie is at that time. And then the fact that he was able to get that start in Los Angeles, perform the way he did. I mean, as of right now, I would say I would expect against the Ducks, Ned to be rolling out as the number one goaltender. And this is surprising to me, and I feel like it's a point of conversation because I feel like it goes against Dubas's comments, or at least the way it seemed his comments were saying. It almost seemed like we were talking about how this was going to be Blomqvist's net and that he was going to get the majority of the starts. And I feel like Dubas's comments were the ones that alluded us to that. And so I don't know if there's maybe not necessarily.
Are they playing Nedeljkovic to trade him?
Potentially, but also
I don't know. I'm just trying.
I think looking at the rest of this season, you could play the guy and that backfires and just tanks his actual trade value that he could have for another team. In this case, it would have worked out for the Penguins, so I guess credit to them. But ultimately, right now, going forward, I would say Nedeljkovic is your number one goaltender and Yoel Blomqvist is being treated as the backup. I know it's such a small sample size because only 3 games has passed since we talked about this, but at least in those 3 games, from what I've seen, I have seen no reason why they would take Nedeljkovic out of the number one goalie spot because of the performances that he's had in his games. Both teams, they won both of the games, and I know the one was against the Sabres, but the LA has been a really good team. First time all season that they had trailed 2-0, and they have only lost. I mean, how many games of regulation have they lost? It is not a ton.
14.
Like I feel like that's like one of the better teams that they've played in recent stretches where a goaltender has, like, the team has outplayed them. And the Penguins outplayed the Kings on that night. Ned was a part of that. I just think that there is a precedence being set by how they're using their goaltenders, and I think it goes against kind of what we were talking about last week. I think that goes against what we thought was going to happen. And I'm not necessarily saying it's wrong. It has worked out in these 3 games. But moving forward, I see no reason why they would operate differently and have Ned not be the number one goaltender. Is that necessarily what I would do? Probably not, but because that's just because I see the future of Blomqvist and I value that time between the pipes with him. But ultimately, what the team is doing, I was a little bit surprised by it, and I'd be surprised if I don't see Ned and net on Thursday night.
That was also only the 4th time this entire season they lost by more than 2 goals. The Kings.
Wow.
So they play a lot of close hockey games. Even if they lose, they're typically pretty competitive. That one was not 5-1. The Penguins win. You talked about, potentially if things were to have gone south, Alex Nedeljkovic could have tanked any trade value. And I don't even know if the Penguins have interest in that. We'll see as it gets closer. Like, if he is truly going to be their number one, I don't understand that path, by the way, if that is what they do. But if it is, then okay. But one person that has certainly not tanked their trade value is Marcus Pettersson. I mean, he might be playing his best hockey right now, game in and game out, highest game scorer on the team, it seems like. And Erik Karlsson's kind of been right there with him, but Marcus Pettersson's the one I want to focus on here because that's who we expect to be dealt. Certainly raising his stock. Don't know what he's going to get traded for. I've seen some, comparable trades thrown out there with people saying, like, I really don't know how the league is going to value Marcus Pettersson. It seems like he's going to have a pretty healthy market, which the abundance of teams is obviously going to be beneficial to the return, maybe even more so than what the player is himself. Just if you have a lot of teams competing for one player, that's obviously going to give him more value to the team. What's your take on that whole situation with Marcus Pettersson?
Well, for one, he's getting hot at the right time. I feel like the writing on the wall is he was going to be traded the entire season. We knew that going into it, and I feel like it is beneficial for the Penguins that he is playing well and playing some good hockey. As far as his trade value goes, I've seen some trades where a lot of people, and it actually, I think it was Jesse Marshall, had mentioned this on Twitter as well, how he saw some trades that were like kind of comparable as far as packages coming back to Pittsburgh goes with the Gensel trade, and as far as how many prospects they're getting, the picks they got. And I just don't think that they're going to sniff anywhere near that. Now, that does not mean that they're not going to get a good return for Marcus Pettersson. I think that there is definitely room for good returns, and if he continues to play moving towards the trade deadline at a high level, that's just going to continue to grow on itself, because I feel like he is a contender's dream right now, being on a expiring contract, potentially a rental if you want him to be, but also has the ability to sign a long-term contract, relatively young-ish age still to be on a second contract. And so if you want him to come back for you, you can do it, and then he could be a shutdown defenseman for you in a cup run. I think that there's definitely a lot of value in that, but as far as what I think that is going to be in a return, I would expect probably something on the along the lines
Ben Sherrod get traded for a first, or am I doing crazy?
Did he?
I know. I mean, it only takes one team to do it. I don't know that I'm not necessarily saying I expect it to happen, but like it's also we can't predict what a bad GM is going to do, or a desperate GM, I should say, is going to do. I swear, when Ben Sherrod got traded, it was for a first.
Was it with the Florida Panthers?
Yeah.
Let me see. Yeah. They traded Ben Sherratt in exchange for Tyler Smilanic and a 2023 first-round pick and a fourth-round pick in 2022.
And a fourth. Okay. Well, the prospect, I don't know what's happened to that player, but he's irrelevant.
So here's what I would say. Like, and it's easy for me to relate it to a team like just because I could name a prospect that I would be interested in the Penguins trading for, the Vancouver Canucks. That's something that we've talked about on the show. But if they were to get a package together, and this is a realistic one that I think, they were going to package together where you could package Niels Höglander and a second going back to Pittsburgh for Marcus Pettersson. I think that is a good value for the Penguins, and I think that that's something that you could realistically see back. You're not going to see a trade like Gensel where you had 2 or 3, 4 players returning in a backup plus multiple trades. Like that's just not the type of player Marcus Pettersson is. He's not going to be valued that way from everybody else. But getting a young player that has higher upside like a Niels Höglander that maybe needs just a change of scenery to progress in his NHL career, and then getting a higher draft pick. I don't know necessarily that they're going to get a first, but like you mentioned, it only takes one team to do it, and teams do get desperate a lot of the times. I mean, look at what we went through with Jim Rutherford. We traded our first-round pick like every year for several years in a row. I feel like it's possible that Marcus Pettersson could garner a first-round pick. I don't know what the rest of the trade around him looks like. Maybe he doesn't even value, when I say he, Kyle Dubas doesn't even value a player in return. If he's getting a first-round pick, maybe he packages that together with like a first-round pick and a third-round pick, first-round pick and a fourth-round pick, depending on the years of these picks as well. But if you're getting a player back, I think as long as it's someone of the caliber that could be like a Niels Höglander, just as an example, because we talked about that. And I feel like that's actually been one that has been talked about around the league as a potential trade partner. I would expect probably the highest pick you're going to return is a second. I wouldn't imagine the Vancouver Canucks would be trading Niels Höglander in a first, but I think that somebody else could trade another prospect and a first-round pick. I just don't think that you're going to get this overwhelming trade where you're seeing 5 pieces coming back to Pittsburgh. Realistically, you're probably looking at least 1 or 2 picks and then maybe a prospect.
I think from a player perspective, Höglander makes a ton of sense. The thing that I question about it, though, is like the whole reason that we're talking about change of scenery and like him being in the doghouse or whatever is with Rick Tocchet. And with how close Rick Tocchet and Mike Sullivan are, I just wonder if like that would play into it. Like, would Tocchet and Sullivan talk off the ice and say Sullivan be like, hey, what's going on with this guy? And then, Sullivan's not even interested in him either. You know what I mean? Like, because they're so similar Like, would he even be a fit with the Penguins? Not from a hockey perspective and the talent that he brings, but just for whatever reason that he's in the doghouse there. Would that change with a very similar coach and who's like best friends with the coach he's in the doghouse with?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Although that also begs the question, how long is Mike Sullivan going to be the head coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins?
Yeah.
But I feel like that's why, even though the important thing is, even though that could have an outcome on it, Kyle Dubas is the one making the trade, not Mike Sullivan. So he's going to do what is best for the future of this franchise. I feel like he's shown that in the past couple months and in really the past year of his trades. He's shown that he's going to value the future of this franchise over the current president of the franchise. And I don't fault him for that. In fact, I think that is the beneficial thing to do, is valuing the future of this franchise. So if he trades off a piece like Marcus Pettersson and gets a first-round pick in a return, and then it either gets let's say a third-round pick or a eligible prospect of the same level of what a third-round pick would be, I would take that as a win for the Penguins. I don't think Penguins fans should look at a trade like that where you're only getting one or two pieces back and then be upset about that return. I mean, quite frankly, if your trade for Marcus Pettersson includes a first-round pick, you won. Not necessarily as far as the play on the ice goes, but that's a good return for the Penguins.
Yeah, and from an on-ice perspective, I mean, no question about Nils Höglander. And I think when you look at the pipeline that the Penguins have and where they're lacking in the forward group, he'd certainly be an answer there within their top six, not just for the short term, but also the long term, and really be a game changer. What's going on, everybody? Smitty from Around the 412, and I just want to take a quick second to give a shout out to our folks at Game Changers. Their logo on the screen right now, right above my microphone. Over 2,000 different designs in their catalog. Luxury heavyweight material. I am wearing one of their shirts right now. Best vintage t-shirts in the game. Head over to gamechanger.la or pick6.la to pick up some shirts. And guess what? Use code AT412. Save yourself $10 on your order every single time. Again, gamechanger.la or pick6.la. Best vintage t-shirts in the game. Check them out. Another player that I wanted to ask you about, because I feel like going based off the conversation we had preseason, I gotta give some flowers to this guy and kind of walk back what I felt like was going to happen. Anthony Beauvillier having a nice little season. And I think, honestly, he's never been somebody to me that I feel like this year should have been out of the lineup. There's no reason that he should have been a healthy scratch at one point over the likes of Matt Nieto or Noel Acciari. Not that it surprises me that he was, but he's been a guy that they could slide in basically on any line. And you kind of know what you're getting. Shipped in 12 goals so far this season as well. There's a lot of really nice work on the boards and in front of the net. Just kind of that presence gets under other people's skins as well. I've been impressed with him. And, if any other team is listening out there to this podcast right now, would certainly trade a first or second round pick for Anthony Beauvillier. But all jokes aside, while I do think that the Penguins should sell on him and get what they can at the deadline, as opposed to, I don't know, going into the offseason, losing him for nothing or bringing him back, I think the best path forward would be to trade him at the deadline. I am appreciative of what he's contributed this year because I think he's been one of the pleasant surprises.
Yeah, I think he's actually been really good. He's one where I'd say, obviously, if you trade him, you get the most value out of him, and that's what the goal of Kyle Dubas should be. But ultimately, if he were to be on the Penguins next season, I feel like based off his current play, I wouldn't complain about it either, which is something that I never thought I'd say, despite being the one on this show to say that he's going to be a Penguin. And I thought that he is someone that has definitely outperformed his contract, outperformed his last couple seasons too. I mean, looking at last year, he's already over doubled his goal total between, I believe.
Well, that's my concern.
Blackhawks and Predators.
That's my concern with going forward with him, though, because I understand what you're saying about based off what you've seen this year, feeling like, okay, if he's part of next season, that's fine. But at the same time, I kind of feel like this is the peak of where he's going to be at value.
Oh, for sure. And that's why I think ultimately they should trade him. And last year he was traded to the Nashville Predators for a 5th round pick straight up. I think the Penguins could do better than that just based off his current season. If you were to trade him to somebody, I think that you could get a 4th round pick out of him. And like you said, all he takes one. Maybe you can get as high as a 3rd.
Could they trade him along with Pettersson to maybe bump up because we've talked about a package coming back the other way, but what if the Penguins have a package of players that they can offer as well?
I mean, that could be the case. That could be a good package to pair together. But that's somebody. I feel like it would just take a unique partner in a trade to have that happen, because it'd be a team that's not only looking for left side defenseman, top 4 defenseman, but also looking for a depth bottom 6 piece.
That's why I think Vancouver still makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that could be
Edmonton?
a good possibility. Maybe you do package those pieces together. I'm all for packaging it together to get the most value out of these players, but ultimately, I just want the most value out of them. If trading them by themselves like that, that's fine. But I do think that you can do better than what you got for Beauvillier last year. Looking back at what the Blackhawks got in that 5th round pick, I think that at worst you're going to do at least a round better and get a 4th. But he's doing over the double his production what he did last year. I think you could get a 3rd for him.
That certainly would be nice. I'm just curious to those two. I kind of expect. Everybody else, I'm not really sure about what I think. If you want to read into, and we talked about this last week, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, but just kind of going back into it a little bit, just for anybody that maybe missed last week or missed the article from Josh Yohe. It's really curious to me what the path forward for this team is, just because it seems like everything's kind of in line with the idea that they recognize that this isn't the year and they should be sellers. Other than, like, if they do go forward with Alex Nedeljkovic in net, that's not going to make a ton of sense to me unless it is to boost value and he's straight at the deadline. Like, if we get past the deadline and he's still starting the majority of the games, what are we doing? And then the other thing is, not that I'm upset about it, but it just doesn't necessarily all go together if you are holding on to Rickard Rakell until at least the offseason, because you want to talk about guys at the peak of their value. The year that he's had, I can't imagine what somebody would be willing to give up to get us to part with Rickard Rakell. And if you're trading everybody else because you realize you're not in it right now, why isn't Rickard Rakell part of that?
Yeah, that's going to be the interesting one. If they do end up trading him this offseason and they didn't during the season, that would be such a head scratcher for me. I feel like, and I mentioned this last week too, like you just did, your value is never going to be higher than Rakell. If you're going to convince somebody to take on the rest of this contract for him, the remaining 3 years at $5 million, you are not going to be more convincing than you are right now. And as much as it's been fun to watch Rakell on Crosby's line, I just don't think that that's something that you necessarily want to pass up on if you do get somebody to give you a quote-unquote king's ransom for Rickard Rakell. Now, I don't think Rickard Rakell is somebody that you just trade away, but if somebody is knocking at your door and giving you a healthy return for a guy like him, I think that you have to at least be interested and at least be somebody that is willing to work with that. Yeah, and I wonder, how much does like a guy like Crosby influence this? Like, how much does him having a winger that he is working well with influence that? I feel like
unbelievable year for that line too, as a whole. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that looking at in the past how unofficially Crosby has influenced some moves by the front office or at least the head coach as far as like who he likes, who he wants to play with. I feel like it's not out of the realm of possibility that the fact that Crosby likes to play with Rakell could be why that they hesitate on moving on from him. Whether I agree with that or not, that's different, but I think that Crosby may have somewhat of an influence just because of how well they have played together.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And I think, Crosby's earned obviously the ability to have that type of input and influence within the organization. So I'm very curious to see how they approach this entire thing. We have one question that's not necessarily directly Penguins related, but I saved for this just because it's about all the teams, but we had 5 other ones that were specifically Steelers. So I thought I'd hold one back for this show. Jeff Slattery said, I feel like we answered this question before, maybe not this exact one. Which of the 3 teams do you think are the closest? Oh, it was which, I think before it was which one will, but this is which of the 3 teams are the closest to winning a playoff series, or in the case of the Steelers, a playoff game?
I feel like this is such a tough question because they're all so.
It was easy for me.
It was easy for you?
Mm-hmm. I still believe it's the Steelers, even though it's been so long, because it's one game and anything can happen, but also like they're always right there. Like they have a playoff route in terms of the wins, but they're consistently in the playoffs, and they are one game in the regular season difference away from hosting in the playoffs. And if that were the case going against a Texans team coming here, a Chargers team coming here, a Broncos team coming here, one of those, like, I think that they could have won that game. Now, that's obviously hindsight and it didn't happen, but I just feel like they're the closest to me out of them. I'll be honest, I am so, like, we haven't recorded a Pirates podcast in a while. We'll get back into it at some point here in the coming months before the season starts and during the season. I'm so turned off by them. Like, if we can have a little bit of time here to talk about that, maybe we would have recorded something on the Pirates if they would have done anything meaningful so far this offseason. The fact that we haven't is a testament to the organization not doing anything as they sit on their hands with Paul Skeens, Mitch Keller, and Jared Jones running a rotation. It's disgusting.
You want to know the two most meaningful things that have happened this Pirates postseason?
You're going to say the kid pulling a Skeens card.
Number 2 is that one. The kid pulling the 1-of-1 Paul Skeens MLB debut.
Yeah, they've given a bigger offer to that kid than any free agent in their history.
Seriously. And then the number 1 thing is them re-signing a 30-year-old Andrew McCutchen, which, don't get me wrong.
Andrew McCutchen. Yeah.
Andrew McCutchen. Not to be confused with the new Steelers receiver, McCutcheon. But
Cameron, he's a defensive back.
Corner.
Well, the reason there's a wide receiver as well, Lance McCutchen. So there's Cam McCutchen, that's a defensive back, and Lance McCutchen, that's a receiver.
And don't both Steelers spell it the same way?
Yeah, yeah. It's how people would always say Andrews was.
Right.
No, it's not. Yeah.
So I guess they're technically right now, and Andrews wrong. So he's outnumbered.
There's more O-Ns in Pittsburgh than E-Ns.
But the most significant transaction you did was bringing back Andrew McCutchen, which, don't get me wrong, I will take as much Kutch as I can for the rest of his career because of what he means to this franchise and what he means to me as a player. But if that's the most significant thing you did it's not even improving your team. You just stayed complacent. Like, your payroll is going to be less than it was this past season. How are you doing that when you have Jared Jones and Paul Skeens? You're going to have I know this is a Penguins episode, but you're going to have the Cy Young favorite on your team, and you're not adding to your roster.
Mm-hmm.
That is absolutely blasphemous to me. Anyway, we can complain about the Pirates on a Pirates episode at some point. Maybe that's not going to be until February when the spring training happens, but it hasn't been the last 4 months, so we'll see. But I think that after listening to you, I think you're right. I think that the Steelers probably are number 1, because even if you're not the better team, you could luck your way into winning a football game. And
one. Yeah, exactly. One. They don't have to win
just one game. Like, I feel like despite the score, I feel like a couple different bounces or a couple different plays, and I feel like the playoff game against the Bills a year ago, the Steelers, even with Mason Rudolph, could have lucked their way into winning it. I don't think the Bills were like that overbearing to me. Like, if they get some better defense, I don't think the Bills are looking that like.
I think that's the bigger thing.
Maybe that's a crazy take. Maybe that's a crazy take to have. But I really feel like that. Like, they could have lucked their way into winning.
The offense moved the ball fine and actually scored in the second half. But yeah, no TJ Watt, Miles Jack is a starting linebacker after he got his pilot's license and was basically done playing football. Backup safeties, like that defense on the back 2 levels was just Band-Aid last year, going into the playoffs. So yeah, I think the answer for me is I'd rank them Steelers, Penguins, Pirates in that order for who there's no faith right now for me in the organization, which is a completely different conversation than we were having in, like, I don't know, June of last year, July of last year, where it looked like this team last year at the trade deadline. Because I'll be honest, I'm admittedly a baseball casual at this point in time. And I understood, like, the Brian De La Cruz move was not very good. They overpaid for a guy that's basically home run or nothing. But the IKF move I really liked, and it started out well. And I appreciated the fact that I thought the Pirates actually made meaningful moves at the deadline. And then they got worse. They were worse from that point on and fell apart and collapsed. There's no faith for me right now in that organization.
So you'd say the Penguins are ahead of them?
Yep.
Because I would say, as far as like winning a series go, and this is also assuming if they made a series. So I have no idea how the team gets to that
It's a
series.
shorter series.
I'm just starting at the series. If you
Mhm.
started a wild card and it's best of 3, I
Yeah.
think you could at least make the argument that the Pirates may
Pitching
have a
wise,
better
they'd be
chance
set
of
up to
winning
do it.
because
Yeah.
of pitching.
I'm going based off my belief.
The
I think the
problem is
Penguins.
you have to get to that point, and I just don't
Yeah.
think that it's going to happen.
I think the Penguins get back to the playoffs before the Pirates make the playoffs. No, that's where I'm at.
I mean, we talk about it this year, and I don't think the Penguins are a playoff team. You don't think the Penguins are a playoff team. Most people shouldn't think they're a playoff team, but we've seen at times they play okay. I mean, look at what they did against LA the other night. They could luck their way into a playoff spot. I'm not saying
more
it's going
teams
to happen.
also
I don't
make
think
it.
it's going to happen.
So,
but yeah, I just they could find themselves squeaking into a second wild card at some point. That doesn't mean they're going to win the series, but I definitely think that they're probably more likely to make the playoffs than the Pirates are.
Despite if you're more likely to make the playoffs, you're more likely to win a playoff game than a team that is not making the playoffs.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like, if you would have asked me prior to the 2024 seasons for each of them, I would have said I think the Pirates get back to the playoffs before the Penguins. After watching last year play out and watching them go through this offseason the way that they have, I don't think so. I don't think that they're that close. Like, I would have thought that right now should be the first year where the Pirates are like legitimately competing for a playoff spot. I thought last year if they made it, they would have been a year ahead of where I thought they'd be. Now I expect them to be in the playoffs, and I don't think they're going to.
And you're only adding to the pitching too. We're expecting potentially Bubba Chandler to come up at some point this season too.
Mm-hmm. I mean, trade, if you're not going to spend in free agency, trade from that depth. Trade from the pitching to get bats. I guess you could argue the Spencer Horwitz trade was them trading Luis Ortiz to do that, but not meaningful enough. Like, Spencer Horwitz could be a nice addition, could be a very nice bat. He's 27 years old. He's basically had a half season in the major leagues that he was productive. Could work out. I'm not sure, but I would have. I don't know that that's enough of a commitment for me to say, like, yeah, they're not going for it right now, despite the pitching that they have.
This is kind of a deep cut. You got to really know Beaver County baseball in order to understand this reference. And shout out to Malik because he suffered through it. Who is more likely to, what is more likely between these two scenarios? The Pirates win a playoff game, not a series, just a game, or Aliquippa baseball to win a game, period.
I was wondering where that was going. Aliquippa.
I mean, yeah,
that's
probably.
How low I am on the Pirates. That's how low I am on the Pirates. That's good. Again, yeah, if you're not a Beaver County Whippeal person, you're going to have no clue why that was just said. But look it up. Look up Aliquippa's baseball record for the history of time, really, and see. Appreciate the question, Jeff. Hope the answer sufficed. I'm going with the Steelers to win a playoff game next out of the Pittsburgh teams. Realistically, if we're including college athletics as well, Pitt women's volleyball is my pick to win a national championship before anybody else wins anything in Pittsburgh. They should have won it this year, dude. My God. Don't know if you paid attention at all. I got really into Pitt women's volleyball this year and thought this was the year.
I knew they were good, but I didn't really follow it, though.
But, in typical Pitt fashion, they collapsed in the Final Four against Louisville. So, and Penn State, of all teams, won the national championship in women's volleyball. Anyways, yeah, we're going to get out of here.
For reference, by the way, last year, Aliquippa baseball was 0 for 14, and they were ranked 634th in Pennsylvania for high school baseball teams.
Wow. There you go.
There's
your
reference.
There's your point of reference for all you out there. I'm not so sure that those numbers are going to make the cut. Smitty from around the 412 here, and while I may not have much hair, the hair that I do have will not be cut by anybody besides Keek at Keek's Barbershop. My friend Christian Circle, been with us since day one. Keek's Barbershop, located 401 Burkitch Way, Suite 2 in Beaver, PA. Download the app The Cut. Book an appointment with Christian today, or you can do walk-in with Tony or Ashley. But again, Keek's Barbershop, 401 Burkitch Way, Suite 2 in Beaver, PA. Go check them out. Old school vibe in there. Absolutely love it. Cannot recommend them enough. Wouldn't go anywhere else. Maybe I'll see you there. And then, of course, right above Tyler, Marcelo Electric, our friend Brandon Marcelo and his brother Joe Marcelo started their own small business not too long ago, commercial and residential. Beaver County, Butler County, Lawrence County, Allegheny County. Yeah, I'm going to keep doing that. Like Beaver County. I just got to say Beaver County first because I think about it too much. So get that one out of the way. Get that one out of the way and then move along with the rest of it. But anyways, link in the description to his Facebook page for the company, and then you'll see the email and phone number to contact him there as well. Also on Facebook, Everything Custom Designs, where our merch can be found, hoodies, long sleeve tees, t-shirts, as well as your own stuff. You can do the custom item yourself. A few weeks until Valentine's Day. I'm not sure what the turnaround is. Maybe you can still get involved there, but certainly for Easter, get a jump on that if you want something custom made, a gift for somebody else. DC4L Customs shorts of ours down below with our Around the 412 logo. Not sure if it's short season. I guess probably in some parts of the world. Not sure of anywhere that's watching or listening to this show. But if it is, go get yourself some shorts or just buy them now and have them in advance for when it does finally warm up around you. And then, of course, Game Changers, gamechanger.la, pick6.la. Save yourself $10 at checkout when you use the code AT412. For their little promo thing that I do on here, it said 2,000 plus custom designs. They've doubled that. So I'm guessing they're probably close to 3,000 at the time, but the site said 2,000 plus. They've hit 3,000. Now they've hit 4,000. They're just constantly churning stuff out. Ohio State just won the national championship in football immediately after they got designs for them win the national championship. So their turnaround is crazy. So shout out to them. Go check them out. Did a t-shirt. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. If you are watching here on YouTube, hit us in the comments with your thoughts, a question for a future episode, all that good stuff. Also, leave us a 5-star review and subscribe if you're listening somewhere else, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. You can find us there. Just search Around the 412. Do the same thing and follow us on all the socials. And that's it for Tyler, for Smitty. This has been the Around the 412 Penguins show, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.